Well, I'm very excited about continuing with the series Face to Face, and I'm very excited about sharing my testimony and my story of how I had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. So if you're wondering about my accent, I'm a Jewish Christian African American. That kind of sums it up. And I really am, because I've actually got an African passport and an American passport. I'm a South African and an American citizen. I'm a believer in Jesus as well. And I'm Jewish, so I guess that's all four categories that we just covered there. And talking about accents, they can be easily misunderstood. Such is the case where there was a particular occasion, there was a British ship off the German coast, and the British ship struck a reef and began to sink. And so the British captain sent out an SOS immediately to the German Coast Guard, and a few moments later, there was a crackly voice on the other side in a thick German accent, and he says, "Yeah, what I can do for you?" He says, "What do you mean, what can you do for me? I'm sending out an SOS, we're sinking. And the German Coast Guard says, "Yeah, I heard that you are sinking, but what exactly are you sinking about?" So hopefully that won't happen when I'm communicating with you today. You'll know exactly what I'm thinking about today. So, being Jewish, and, many years ago, when you would talk about a Jewish person, it was like the antithesis of believing in Jesus. And so people would just say, Jewish people don't believe in Jesus. That was a common saying, especially when I was young. And, today we can't say that anymore, because more and more Jewish people are coming to faith in Jesus as their Messiah. Really, it's a sign of the times that we're living in. In fact, today, I don't know if you know this, but maybe about 1967, before Jerusalem came back into Jewish hands, there were a handful of Jewish believers. Most of the congregations were churches that other countries have planted. Today, there's over 120 indigenous Messianic congregations in the land of Israel today. We can give the Lord a big hand for that. And not only in Israel, but all around the world. And as Pastor Tom said, we're very, very actively involved in equipping and training the body to be able to reach the Jewish people with the knowledge of their Messiah, and training them how to do that. And so I was one of those people that growing up, believing in Jesus wasn't an option. I went to private Jewish schools. And my father didn't want me to experience the persecution for being Jewish that my grandparents experienced. In Lithuania, my grandparents experienced pogroms at the hands of the Russian Cossacks. During Easter especially was a very scary time for them. We get the warm fuzzies, and I love Easter in America, But when I mentioned Easter to my grandfather, just fear would grip his face, because the Russian Orthodox priests would preach fiery sermons accusing the Jews of killing Christ. And they would invade villages, mobs of what in the Jewish mind were Christians, because they went to churches. And they would plunder and loot and rape and pillage. And the saddest thing is that in the front there was a priest with a huge cross. And so they thought this was all being done and perpetrated in the name of Christianity and in the name of Jesus. And so you can see what I've had to come up against. For me to be now a pastor at a church preaching the gospel is an absolute miracle of transformation and healing that God has done. And I'm so grateful for that. And just to give you a bit of the brief history, so my grandparents, actually my grandfather and my great-grandfather left in about 1918, and then my grandmother on the other side left Lithuania in 1936. And all of the remaining family that was left behind in Lithuania, both of their villages were over 60% Jewish before World War II. After World War II, there wasn't one Jew left in any of the villages, gunned down and massacred by the Nazis. And so we see the hand of God, when God has a plan for a family, when God has a plan for a life, God saw that there was going to be believers in the family, all the way down through to me. And God preserved the family so we'd be safe in South Africa during World War II. And so I'm here to tell the story, which is really a blessing. It's much better than not being here at all, right? And so we see God's hand of preservation. I really never considered Jesus an option, and my father sent me to private Jewish schools. I always believed in the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I just never considered Jesus as a possibility because I just knew Jews didn't believe in Jesus. Why? Well, I was told, well, God can't have a son, and that's not possible. He was a good man, and all those things, all those cliches that you hear about Jesus, and I just never gave it a thought. Anyway, I went to law school for a few years, and then I decided that really wasn't for me, and I had no choice but to go into the army. I was drafted into the army, and during that time, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. Now, for those of you who don't know South African history, the ruling party at that time was the Afrikaans people, the Afrikaans nation, and they're the ancestors of the Dutch and Germans. And while many of them are God-fearing Christians, there's also a lot of anti-Semitism as well in that culture, which I experienced in a very extreme way while I was in the army. In fact, 3 Jewish guys who I knew very well, the anti-Semitism was so bad that 3 of them tried to commit suicide. And it's really difficult to explain, but it was just the atmosphere that we experienced during that time. I really knew how to fight, in fact, quite well. In fact, I was undefeated in 3.5 years of full-contact martial arts tournaments. But I couldn't let the Afrikaners know that I knew how to fight because there were about 20 Jews and about 800 of them. And if they knew that I could fight, then every single one of them, and they're huge, much bigger than me, most of them, then I would just be fighting every day for 2 years. And I just didn't think that would be a very good way to pass 2 years of my life. It'd be kind of stressful, So, and so what I did, us Jews are more known for our wit than our physical strength, even though I was maybe an exception as far as being able to fight. And so I looked for the biggest Afrikaner that I could find, and there was a particular guy, and his name was Tokkie. Now, by the way, Tokkie means a door knocker. You know those big old-fashioned metal door knockers? And I had no idea why they called him Tokkie. That wasn't his real name, but that's what they called him. Imagine calling someone door knocker. I mean, there's got to be a reason, This is my friend door knocker, And one day I saw him in a fight, and he knocked this guy unconscious in one punch, and then I understood why they called him door knocker, because it only took one shot. So I thought, well, I've got to win his heart and his loyalty, and I noticed, he wasn't the brightest of characters, but I noticed that he drank a huge can of sweetened condensed milk in about 30 seconds, and that's what he loved. Someone said, ooh, I agree with you. And so I went up to him tentatively, and I said, Tokkie, can I just make a deal with you? If I give you 1 can of condensed milk a week, will you protect me and be my bodyguard? Now, he had no money, so his face lit up, and he grunted, which I took to be a yes. And so he protected me for the rest of the time during boot camp, which was really pleasant. It was better than me having to do the fighting. But anyway, so during this time, I was going through a really rough time, and there was a particular guy who began to witness to me. Now, his name was John. He was a Greek South African. In South Africa, just like in America, you have Greek South Africans, you have Italian South Africans, Portuguese South Africans. And he began to talk to me about Jesus, and I kind of began to listen to him because, I was in quite a pretty desperate state. But finally I said, look, I'm Jewish and Jews don't believe in Jesus, so please, enough of all this Jesus business, just let's talk about other things. And with that, he opened his Bible, gave it to me and said, here, read this. And so if you got your Bibles with you, open up to Psalm 22, and I'm going to show you what I read. And it starts off saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then it goes on to say, for dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones, they look and stare at me, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Now, I read this, and immediately I thought, but this is describing the crucifixion of Jesus. You say, well, how could I have known that? Well, I'll tell you how I knew, because I listened to the record, Jesus Christ Superstar. And that's all I knew about the gospel in Jesus. Now, I believe it was controversial in some Christian circles, but I wouldn't have known the difference. I just liked the music, and I didn't know about all that stuff. And so I knew because of the record, because, remember the 45 RPM record? Some of you will remember that. It's like a huge black frisbee that they look like, And about half of the guys laugh, and the other half are like, what is he talking about? What's a 45 RPM record, Anyway, at least half of you know, so you can follow with me. And anyway, so it had the words as well. When you opened up the album, it had the words so you could sing along. And I wouldn't sing in front of anyone because I wasn't a great singer, but I'd do it alone. And the words there were, my God, why have you forsaken me? And also, it said in Jesus Christ Superstar, which was my source of knowledge about the gospel, that they cast lots for his garments. And so I thought, well, this guy's just given me the New Testament, and he's not supposed to give a Jew the New Testament to read. So I gave it back to him. I said, I'm sorry, but Jews don't believe in the New Testament, and I gave it back to him. And he said, no, it's not the New Testament. This is Psalm 22, written by King David. And I'm like, what? There's no way. How could King David know about the crucifixion? It doesn't make sense. So I read it again and again, and sure enough, it says a Psalm of David. Anyway, I was really befuddled. I didn't know how to respond, but I was convinced it was a Christian plot to try and convert Jews. And, us Jews are more known for our quick thinking than our physical prowess, And so my lawyer-trained mind began to think, and I thought, no, okay, here's the problem. I've got an explanation for you. This psalm was translated by Christians, and Christians don't know any Hebrew. Us Jews know Hebrew. And so you guys translated it to try and make it sound like it's Jesus, so that gullible young Jews like me would just somehow read it and then by osmosis become a Christian. Spiritual osmosis, If you want to know what that is, I have no clue, but it just sounded good. And so I thought, here's what I'm going to do. When I'm on leave, I'm going to go to my grandmother's house, and I'm going to read the Hebrew myself. And then I'm going to read the rabbi's translation into the English and see what they say. So I went on leave, opened up the Tanakh in the Hebrew, read the English and the Hebrew translation, and I was very surprised to find how similar it was to the NIV translation, with one difference that really jumped out at me, and that is what I read earlier on, verse 16, where it says, they pierced my hands and my feet. Now, the Hebrew word for that is ka'aru, or ka'ari, depending on where the vowel is. You have to understand, in the original manuscript, there are no vowels in the Hebrew in most cases. Like if you look at the Torah, there's no vowels. So the same word, depending on where the vowels would be, could be translated, they pierced or like a lion. Either way, are you following me? But here's the thing, when I read the context and it says, they like a lion, my hands and my feet, I'm like, what does that mean? Because the rest is describing the symptoms of a crucifixion, and then it says, they like a lion, my hands and my feet. I'm like, imagine if someone threatened you and said, I'm going to pierce your hands and feet, and I'm going to crucify you. I mean, that'd be quite scary, right, if that happened? But if someone came up to me and said, I'm going to like a lion, your hands and your feet, I'd just be like, are you drunk? Or like, what are you talking about, And so here is my point, and this is really important. I thought, well, if it says they pierced my hands and my feet, and that is one option, why change it to something that makes no grammatical sense? And so something hit me deep in my heart that, is it possible that maybe the leaders of my people are trying to hide something? Because if Jesus is not the Messiah, let it stand on its own merit. Don't change the context to something that makes no grammatical sense. Now, the reason I'm bringing up this whole point is very important, because from that time onwards, I believed that Jesus was probably the Messiah. But I had no clue what to do about it. Because the guy who'd witnessed to me belongs to a weird cult group, which I don't have time to go into what they believe, but just to say they were weird. and he was weird, and I didn't want to be weird. But I thought Jesus could be the Messiah. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know you had to be born again or how to pray to receive Jesus, none of that stuff.